Right, hello everyone, and welcome to this pre-recorded stream. And this is going to be the start of probably many pre-recorded bits that I will cover on the channel. And today I'm going to be talking about two stories which are have sort of been talked about in online and in the real world. One of which is UK related, the other one is more political scene related. And with the UK one, it's the Chagos Islands in the Indian Ocean, the British territories there, which have been signed away to the Mauritius Islands by the UK government at the behest, apparently, according to the Telegraph today, by the United States government. And the second story, as well, that we'll be covering is the recent outburst by James Lindsay, who is a commentator who is in sort of like your Jordan Peterson, Gad Saad, centre-right Republican supporters. So, and his your recent outburst of what he called the woke right, particularly targeting Aaron McIntyre and other people who he believes are, worshipping some sort of Zoroastrian demon and Archangel Michael and everything. But I won't get into the sort of delusions of his sort of the madness of the context, but just looking at the actions, behaviour, and why what this sort of shows. Because in some ways, these starking similarities between him and Keir Starmer. So, starting with the UK, the government recently announced that they would be handing back the British Indian Ocean territory, the Chagos Islands, to the Mauritius Islands, the Mauritius state, which has the island has a joint UK and American naval base, air base, which is seen as a tactical position in that area of the world in the Indian Ocean. And this has been widely criticised because the Mauritius nation are in bed with China, and that one of these islands could be now in theory used by the Chinese to build some sort of outpost or base there, rendering the already existing British American base useless for any upcoming conflict. So that one happened. It's funny because we've covered on this channel the Richard Hilton books and looking at the actions of decolonization and the actors behind it, and also heavily referenced the Adam Curtis series Oceans Apart. And after sort of consuming both forms of media, we are still seeing the very same belligerent and ideological naivety by the US regime when it comes to dealing with, how to work power in the international realm. And also this sort of vehement hatred of the old world, which I think transcends both the political divides. There is some way you could argue the sort of more right-wing nativist element of American society has a hatred of Europe because of its lack of unity, but also lack of what was the phrase, like centre of culture and those sort of things. And then the same could be said for in the left in America. Biden, the speech going around, there was a speech of Biden many years ago where he uh, was critical of the European Union, the fact that they hadn't formed a United States of Europe, and it wasn't there was no sort of centre of culture in Europe. So, given that, we have well, this this complexity of the anti-British sentiment to sort of rear its head again, and it's not lost on any of us, I think, that have noticed that we knew who the main pressure was, and this was American pressure in particular. And bear in mind, they had a foothold with the British military in the base as well. There's nothing much that we could do. We talked about on Iron Stream, what would happen if, hypothetically, because this will have to go to the Commons, which I'll talk about in a sec. The UK was to say no, then presumably they would pull the same manoeuvre they did with the Suez Crisis, where they tried to bankrupt the UK nation. That being the Truman administration. So we'll see what comes to that. Now, this has been sort of pointed as like a sort of done deal, and in theory, it isn't, but practically it most likely certainly is. So from now, this particular decision will have to go before Parliament, who will ratify, or in theory could vote this down. But because of Labour's majority, it's unlikely that there will be any Labour MPs of significant numbers that will oppose this. The argument used by that oath, Lammy, has been due to this would help prevent migrants travelling across the Indian Ocean on dinghies or something like that, which, like the Indian Ocean is the epicenter of all those problems. And in reality, as I've discussed before, it's not illegal migration that's the problem. It's also the legal one. It's the numbers on the legal side that nobody cares about. Not even the reform, which is meant to be on our side of things. So there is that. And it's quite funny because this sort of action, it's not been surprising to me. This is the action I would expect from people like Starmer in particular. That, and this is why I call the title of the stream the Will of Men. Oh, sorry, Men of Will, even Men of Will, and you have this is something that is lacking in in the West in particular, but in today's society. And instead you have these the sort of man of papers, the man of managerial man, and Starmer represents he is the living embodiment of that. He doesn't conceive of loss of British territory in the significant parts of the world as a massive climb down. He doesn't conceive about of any international repercussions of this, of how we are viewed overseas. I mean, for instance, the wide perception of other countries, especially in the East, will most likely look and say, well, Britain is fully in the domain of America. Now, many people in the Labour Party, many on the left, have been and remain sceptical of America, but they usually whinge about colonialism and all that. But this is a thing. Is the politicians will tell us that we're not America's lapdog, but when you know um, when they request us to do something like this isn't like the sign of alliance. This is a powerful ruler telling their vassals, giving the edict down to their vassals of what to do. See, allies wouldn't do this if in any normal historical time, if an ally of one nation or kingdom or what have you told another ally surrender territory to this other power which is a bit hostile towards us, this would be an alliance breaker. This would break an alliance. This probably would even start some sort of forms of hostility. But we don't have that moral unity with our people. We unlike a normal society, we have a total disconnect and breakdown of those who govern us, who govern for minority interests, minority groups at the expense of the majority, because the majority are not factored in and not organised and not a threat. Unlike other powerful minority groups that will utilise street protests and international favours to get what they want. But there's this archetype of the Keir Starmer and his minions of, and you see it in all forms of societies now. You might even see it in your own workplace of these people who are, not only are they just incompetent, but they actually don't see why their actions are weak and why they are, just incapable, even if it's explained to them. They cannot see. They shouldn't be anywhere near these sorts of positions of power, but that's where we are today. And on the flip side, we'll talk about James Lindsay, who, my understanding, him and a group, they became known as he wrote this fake article for some feminist journal, Come magazine or something, where they wrote in sort of woke language, I guess you could say, wokey language, calling about dogs, sort of male dogs raping female dogs or something mad like that, which was all well and good. It was funny at the time. But from that, he is sort of propelled him, and he's gone on to do a few, go on to the Griff Network. But he always described himself as a, MAGA American, anti-communist is his favourite little catchphrase. And this particular individual has taken great lengths to demonise people like Aaron McIntyre, who are, and other figures who actually look at the problems in the West and I guess in America as well, and diagnose that the issue isn't necessarily, there's necessarily like these external forces of communism that many neocons would propagate in the 80s and in the 80s and the Reagan era, but actually it's rampant individualism which has created a selfish and atomized class of people who in turn, when given, when that becomes a generation and then a generation within society and positions, in employment positions, working positions, both in government and in parts of culture, you then have that values being propagated wider, beyond and into the wider world. And this is the sort of question of origin of woke, where I mean, the idea is communist Marxist theory. Then you have others that view it that it sort of originates within liberalism, or to be more specific, liberals in America, given some of its nature, especially on the uh, racial dogma, which is something you don't see in the West. And I've had a few back and throws on this. I mean, for example, the lot of the black identitarian movements in the UK in the 80s and 90s were formed in the 70s. And a lot of that, I mean, one particular one was a civil rights activist who came over from America to help organize and build up that movement, which would take on the Met Police and the Brixton riots and the police and society in general, which is the sort of crowd that Lammy sprung from. And so we have the woke right, which in his mind is a anti-American communist fascist, because of course in his mind communism and fascism is exactly the same thing, where it's un-American, and they're trying to overthrow the American values, and they're poisoning the ear of Donald Trump, which is more recent thing. And then he went on a tirade of Archangel Michael. He tweeted out an image, I think an image which was a statue of St. George. So he making a complete ass of himself in the public sphere. But moreover, what this shows is the actual show of a character, and this is why I've been I'm very choosy who I who I look at, who I view or read, to see what's their opinions or views on this, because it seems to me, and I thought this was a given, and I think most people thought it was a given, that people in the circles many years ago, and I'm talking about towards the era of like late first term Trump period, that people on our side who were against a lot of the what people would define as woke or anti-Western rhetoric wanted to win. That we would get these mutants, Bioleninist types out of power, out of positions of power, and save our respective countries. That was what we all thought we wanted, and to do that, it was number one. We knew, again, we knew. I expected. We all knew that the system was what created these people, not some magical external forces. But unfortunately, that has not been the case, and many, not just James Lindsay, but others have consistently defended the status quo, and continually defend the current system and its structure. And any sort of action that tries to overthrow that, he sort of reverts back to being the establishment figure. Any sort of traditionalism, and this is the thing. I think this is what Jonathan Bowden, in a speech, he once said, that what separates the people who you want an organisation to those you don't is what's their view on equality. And this is more defining than left or right. Either you believe in inequality or equality, and I think that's sort of a good barometer to use in judging at this point. And the thing is, what makes this, the age of the podcaster, the age of the social commentator, so pernicious is it's allowed a new form of containment to rear its head and control in stuff that, I mean, before internet podcasting, I don't, it would be incredibly difficult to capture a dissident group like that without using what we would call the mainstream media at the time. But that would be difficult in itself, especially because if you'd have to be getting to alternative media, but which is now readily available for everybody. And we saw this with Lawrence Fox, of course, in this country. I mean, he has spent a good few years LARPing as this dissident figure who has sucked money and energy out of the right to, to this fantasy land that the utopia is going to be, everything's going to get harkened back to some sort of Christian ethical foundation, which, I mean, its foundation is that of the societies it was built on. It's built on the Roman, Greco-Roman society, and then later the Germanic and Nordic and Slavic societies, which is what formed ethics, and I believe in ethics and culture, and that the religious aspect was a part of it, but it wasn't the foundation of it. There were greater foundations of it before that. The English people existed before the Christianization of the Anglo-Saxons. There was still a Mercia and Northumbria and Wessex before, and there was during and after. But these sorts of people don't, at the heart of it, they don't want anything to change because they want to remain either, I think, some financially, but also some just want to remain in the safe, cuddly time frame between 2015 to 2017, where it was shits and giggles and memery. And that's not where it is at the moment. And I would say to those sorts of people, there is like this point of growing up. And the thing though is, they because that audience have largely moved beyond it. It's why you're having, why Lindsay is having having sort of like this quasi-religious meltdown on Twitter, or it's why Jordan Peterson is behaving erratically in public, and it's because they can't fathom that they can't accept that there has been a shift into a different direction, that their people have shifted, and that the scene has shifted to a different arena. And it's sort of making them go mad because they're just out of it. And some have adapted or adapting in some form or way. Others are still lagging behind. But we're at a point where the world's in the West. There is some semblance of position where the West could be heading into a conflict fairly soon. we have in the UK, but potentially upcoming in the depending on what happens at the end of November, a government which is incredibly hostile to the people, in favour of an outgroup of several outgroups, and we have that here, of course. And we will have to figure out, and this is why we need to, we need to now look, for not to be distracted by these, these sorts of men of these weak-willed, cowardly individuals who, will sort of jump from one fad to another. I mean, you got Russell Brand doing like some sort of Rasputin impression with Jordan Peterson and others. I mean, James doesn't. He's on to it. James, he's not a Christian. He's a quite a militant atheist. He hates religiosity and also the institution of the church. I mean, on the topic of foundational stuff, because America is effectively the founded on a set of colonies. One could argue that actually the foundation of America is Christian. I mean, the values of it didn't just spring up from, from the ground magically when the settlers of Jamestown or Plymouth arrived. It wasn't some sort of marginal diktat, but of course for him it is. We can determine these American values, which again, you look at them. It's was it ever the case? I mean, look what happened to what Lincoln did with the South. What the government did with the Reconstruction period, or even, I mean, not to sound like a bit of a shitlib about it, but what happened with the native population. It's there is it is myth building, but myth building isn't bad, but at the same time, this goes back to when we were streaming with Hitman on the War on Terror, is you have you use myth building to relay information to the public and to the masses. You don't use myth narratives when dealing in international politics, because that makes you look like a lunatic. We're bringing democracy and liberal justice to to Afghanistan is a completely ridiculous thing to say. It's a ridiculous. Bearing in mind it was a dedicated a dedicated approach by people like us. It shows a quality of naivety of biblical proportions. It's genuinely beyond mad, and it's one of the worst aspects of the last, the post-war period to now, that that sort of naivety and just outright ineptitude behavior is why why there is so much problems. You know, why there is so much animosity with in the with those in the West, but also those who you know, outside the West, outside the Anglosphere in particular, why there is that sort of hatred. And at the end of the day, I want Britain to succeed. I want Britain to prosper. And at the moment, we are being, you know, held captive by this, you know, our greatest ally, and being sort of stripped away of flesh bit by bit. I mean, this has been going on a lot longer, so we're down to the bone here. Any last vestiges of old England has been swept away by Starmer at this point. I mean, you've got the pub culture. I mean, at this rate, you know, any sort of forms of English identity, which is, I mean, even sort of biscuit tin, like your cricket and things, that, you know, that's not what Fox use, you know. If all these hundreds of thousands of Africans who play cricket, then there's British as you was like, I mean, even that is under, you know, even that could be under threat at this rate. You know, given like the smoking ban and everything else, it's looking pretty bleak. And also, it's looking pretty bleak at the time of this recording. It's absolutely hammering it down. The rain is unbelievable. So anyway, you know, if there is any hope out there, if there is any sort of thing, we need like we do need a man. We need that sort of leadership again, where it is absolute and, you know, not done, you know, by managerials. But as you know, I've talked about this so many times. It's sort of beating a dead horse. Anyway, I was going to probably wrap it up now because it would be a short video. So thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Might do a few more of these on other topics.